Welcome to SFG Top Performance. Today we have our regulars Jason and Derrick. They're going to fill us in on what they've learned over the last couple weeks.
Yes, Derrick and I had the opportunity to go to the AAI Conference. I went Tuesday and he went Tuesday and Wednesday, and they spent a large time of this talking about a very similar topic, and that was fertilizer reduction strategies. And over and over and over again we heard NREC. And I was like, what is NREC? Iowa Nutrient Research and Education Council, and they're doing a lot of studies on how to, reduce runoff in our water and what to do, and to get to where we need to be with the clean water compliance. And I was sat and I thought, why do we, what's the big deal? And that's what people are after. They hear their water's dirty, they want it cleaned up, and people don't always understand what we're doing and what all the composition of this is. So we need to educate them, and we need to work with them and make sure we're complying with what we need to do to reduce it, so we're not forced to do things we don't want to. In that, we learned something. I probably took away different things than Derrick did, but one topic that the speaker from the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation, he made a comment that really kind of hit me pretty hard, that I never thought of, that 10% of our nutrients that are in the soil or in the water are actually coming from nutrients we apply. 90% of the stuff is coming from biological processes in dirt that's actually dumped in the streams, in the water. So, we're doing a lot with that, but we need to do a little bit more with our stream banks and erosion control practices and a lot of that kind of stuff. Derrick, do you want to talk a little more about what we learned there?
Yeah, so the one topic that gets thrown around at the agribusiness conference every year is the nutrient use reduction strategy, and that was brought on in 2013. And our goal was to reduce nutrient runoff by 45%, I believe they said, Jason. Yeah. And they give an update on it every year to see or track how well we're doing. And on phosphorus, we've well exceeded that. And a lot of that's like the things that you were talking about. We're reducing erosion because we don't lose phosphorus in the water. We lose phosphorus by actually losing the soil. So if we reduce erosion, we don't lose that phosphorus, you could say. So we've done a really good job of that over the years. I don't remember all the statistics that they said, but there's been miles and miles of terraces and thousands of acres of waterways put in since 2013 to accomplish this. And our area is a big no-till area, so there's more no-till going on, so there's less of that real erosion that's running down the field that you see every year. And northern Iowa is always the big topic there because there's a lot of tillage up there, and there's been a reduction in tillage, but the biggest thing is there's been practices put in to capture that erosion or capture the water, so we're not losing it. One thing they said, phosphorus, we're doing really good. We're doing a good job. We're exceeding the 45%. We're making that goal. But nitrogen, on the other hand, they didn't really come right out and say it, but essentially we're about in the same boat as we were in 2013, which isn't good. But nitrogen is just a different beast because it moves with the water. So it's water management. It's so hard to control because our tile lines that drain the fields to make fields more productive that we need to do to grow more bushels, that's going right into the stream. So if we're losing water through those tile lines, there's no way to stop it, I guess you could say. And that's one thing that they always show what the solutions are, or what things they could do. And I took away, we've heard of bioreactors and saturated buffers for a long time, and those are always getting better. They're not 100%. They're not easy to do. It's a lot more time, a lot more management for it, and that's been the biggest problem of them. Jason, did they have what'd you take away from that nitrogen, or reducing the amount of nitrogen or the runoff that we have, or do you have anything more to add there?
Yes, I do. A lot of things we've talked about here in the last several podcasts fit right into what they were talking about. They might not have been exact strategies they were talking about, but split application of nitrogen, doing the tissue sample and making sure you're getting the correct amount of nitrogen on to optimize your yield, but also not waste any nitrogen to go into the soil. Using a nitrogen and phosphorus stabilizer to stabilize the two. And there's a lot of different practices that we talk about every podcast. We mentioned one of them, I think, the fertilizer recommendations and putting the right amount, the right fertilizer in the right place instead of getting too much. A lot of the practices we talk about every 2 weeks, we brought them up. Our practices they mentioned. So I think we've been headed in the right track as far as that. One other thing I took away is, we talked about the soil and stuff. In every ton of soil, there's 2.32 pounds of nitrogen and a pound of phosphorus per ton. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but the average NRCS says the average we lose 2 ton per acre per year. So we're looking at 4.6 pounds of N per acre per year on an 80-acre field. And that's pretty substantial when we look at we're putting on 160, 80, 200 pounds of nitrogen on the soil. And how much of that's going to filter through 10%, that's 20 pounds. So this number is pretty substantial that we're losing from runoff, from stream banks falling in, from the organic matter going down the streams. So there's a lot of other factors that we need to do something about we're on the right track. We're losing 10% with that, but
Sure.
we need to do some other things with our stream banks. And we can do that, every farmer owns a stream. So we can do a little bit there too. So.
And that's one thing that I kind of took away to build off that is the saturated buffer seems about the most effective in my opinion to reduce that, because essentially what they're doing is they're however many feet, 40, 50, 60 feet away from these streams. They're keeping that to a perennial grass. But then what they're trying to do is, unless there's a lot of water going through that tile line, so they're actually trying to not funnel, but take that tile line up to the top of the saturated buffer and then have the water percolate down through, and then that perennial grass takes up the nutrients, and then it's a lot cleaner water that goes down to the stream. The problem here again then is if the tile lines are running real heavy, if there's a lot of rain, we can't back up our field. So that's one of the issues with it, and you got to make sure it's graded correctly. It's a whole nother realm that I'm not a part of as an agronomist. Charles will be better at it with grading grading the ground and be able to put those in, but. It's just there's a lot of good information and a lot of good stuff coming out of there, like the bioreactors. That's those wood chips that you put at the end of tile line that grabs onto the nutrients, and it's a lot cleaner. When I was in college, they were a lot smaller scale, and a bioreactor would do 10 or 20 acres. I'd be like, well, that's good for 10 or 20 acres, but you can't take that to a 500 acre corn production, that sort of thing. It's just not practical. But they have gotten bigger. The one they were talking to, 200 foot long, 10 foot wide, something along those lines, all filled with wood chips, and it does 100 acre field. So if something would be practical like that, where you could run the water through there and filter it, and then the water at the end of the bioreactor comes out clean, that's a lot more practical. Now like I said, we got a long ways to go there, but the first step, like you said, is just our nitrogen management, and we just need to get away from putting on 200 pounds of nitrogen in one shot and getting what we get. But we do a lot of split applications. We do a lot of the tissue sampling. We really move towards managing that nitrogen more intensive, because like you said, we're going to be managed. We're going to be forced to be managed on it if we don't make an effort to do it ourselves.
Definitely. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is going to get us a long ways. And another topic that they put in the middle of this that dealt with fertilizers, they brought in a fertilizer economist, and he gave a really good talk about, every time Charles gives us a price, it's been a little bit higher since this fall. And I know you as customers, you kind of wonder why. And he he did a very good job of explaining why, and he went through the snowball effect that we've had of, the demands with this COVID slowed down a lot of the supply chains, and then the demands and the things that have happened, and how a lot of the plants in the United States were slowed down. It takes 3 years to bring a lot of them back or more, and how much energy each one of them takes. They're all depend on fuel, electric, or some sort of energy. So there's a huge snowball effect. There's 20 different things he brought up that he had a timeline, and it was very effective of explaining that it's not price gouging. There's been a snowball effect of energy and demand. And Derrick, do you want to take a little bit more of that than I did?
And that's what really surprised me of it. And I had day 2, I sat in on seed forum, and they kind of had a supply chain issue. Economist talk from Iowa State, and he was building off that same thing. But what really surprised me is that 2019 and 2020, right before COVID, or right when COVID happened, everybody we're going to shut things down, started slowing down. Inventory started to reduce. But then when everybody was at home, what's kind of funny, the statistic they have now is that the service industry was totally shut down, so nobody was going and doing any services. But the goods were way above what their even pre-COVID predictions were. So everybody was at home buying things. Yep. So then they were talking about truck drivers, where they don't, like, there's always been a shortage of truck drivers. There's always more goods to move, but the truck drivers are just overwhelmed because they had the statistic something like it's 15 to 20% higher goods purchased than what their predictions were even before COVID for 2021. So I just thought that was really interesting that we shut down stuff, we trimmed down, sent people home, but then those people just they bought things because they bought things. So there's more. You needed to ramp it up, have more inventory. So that was just kind of a weird. I know we talk about COVID and the supply chain, blaming it on everything, but that kind of put some truth to. There's a lot of stuff that needed to be moved around, and then so that led into our shipping containers trying to get Roundup over here. It just isn't as easy when the Walmarts of the world can grab onto those shipping containers to get more of their goods. So like I said, it was just there's so much to it that kind of opened my eyes that it's not just the price of corn's higher, we're going to get more for fertilizer. I mean, sometimes causation isn't correlation, as they say. So it looks like that, but there's just a lot of there's a lot of behind the scenes things that are happening in the supply chain that it is good that they showed us that.
Yes, that was very interesting, and I think anybody that has opportunity to go to a conference and learn a little about that would gain a lot. So another thing that I think you said on the same conference, they talked about soil sampling, and actually they got into there was kind of a heated debate about it, and when they were talking about dry versus wet soil sampling and what happens, and I think in reality, there's 2 different fertilizers you're talking about, your phosphorus and your potassium. Your phosphorus is not going to move as much. It's not as water soluble. Your potassium is more water soluble to get it out of the plant. So, there's going to be more variation in your potassium with it being more water soluble in a drier soil. So that was pretty interesting the way they talked about that, and then taking cores and things like that. How they multiple cores, at least 10 cores per sample, which we do, and we take a random. And anyhow, and there was a lot of interesting facts that they. And it was kind of interesting to me, it was a heated debate over this, over the phosphorus and potassium. And I think they were both right. It was just which product they were talking about more so than
right, because it kind of got into in a no-till situation, your P and K don't move very much in the soil. But like you said, potassium is very water soluble out of the corn plant. So after harvest, if we don't get a lot of rain, there's a lot of potassium in those leaves and stover and everything that until you get a rain, it's not going to soak its way down into the soil. And once it's in the soil, it grabs on really quick and then doesn't move. But it's very water soluble. Even a live corn plant, you can go. There's a lot of data out there that you can go run water over it and then test the water in a petri dish or something, and there's parts per million of potassium. Like it comes off of those plants easily because, as we know, most of the potassium in a corn plant, it's not in the grain, it's in the actual plant. So that's why corn doesn't remove as much potassium. But it was kind of interesting to see the different points of people kind of not arguing back and forth, but there's a lot of and it's not even misinformation, it's just how you interpret it. And we ran into that a little bit this fall with soil samples. It was it was a pretty dry fall, and so we didn't get a lot of rain. So a lot of our potassium samples came back lower than we'd expect. So that we have a system that we take that into account and everything, and that's why you need someone to be able to interpret those results. Because if you have a result from 4 years ago that's 50 parts per million lower, and you've been fertilizing the right way, you're either taking off a pile of grain, or it's just it was drier during that sample or something like that. And too much water affects it too. So you just got to make sure you take a good accurate sample. But other stuff that happened at the agribusiness, they have a trade show as well. So that was really good to go see those people out in the industry that we see. Some of our reps are there, some people that we used to work with, or you meet up with people you haven't seen in a few years, and it's kind of just a way for everyone to come together. We had a handful of whole businesses that we try that I caught up with. We're kind of testing in the biological camp, something like that. So some of those newer guys were there showing what their capabilities were. Or Iowa State's there talking about the new diseases and new pests that are out in the field. So it's just a really good place to get information, and we took a lot out of that. So that's why we try to pass it. That's why we try to pass it along to you. But Charles, what happened in the last couple of weeks with application or on the operations side?
It's been fairly quiet. I've got one thing to piggyback. I went to a meeting yesterday on the Nebraska Minnesota line, and they talked about the soil and water like you guys were talking. They have regulations in Nebraska and Minnesota. We're lucky that we don't have that yet. They have to prove and show what they're going to do, and they can't just do like we do here in Iowa. We'll just put 200 pounds on, always have it. It works, and yeah, it runs off, but nobody's making me change my ways yet. So out there, they did it so long, I guess they're making them change their ways out there, and that was a talk out there. But they have regulations. They got to put smaller or less nitrogen on at a time, more trips, and it's not fun when the way they talk, as in being regulated, you can only do so much. So it's coming if we don't look ahead and try to do the practices like you're talking. I know a lot of guys think, well, what the heck do I want to put a wood chip pile in my ditch? And it sounds like a lot of, but it's coming. So just be ready for it. Work-wise, we did do a little bit of dry fertilizer, a little bit of super grow here in the last couple weeks. The snow finally disappeared where we can get going. Well, now it's all the way gone, and it's too muddy. So we need to freeze back up or dry up, which it doesn't sound like it's going to dry up anytime soon. I think they're talking some snow again next week or rain. Outside of that, work-wise, we're getting equipment out, going through dry rigs, going through some liquid machines, filling anhydrous tanks, trying to make room in certain buildings so we can get in and work on equipment and some toolbars. But everything's, for the most part, ready to go. Seems like we're a month earlier right now, this warm spell. Usually you think this is kind of March weather. It is only the middle of February, so it could turn off and we could get a lot more snow yet. But anyway, we're ready, and I think it's about as good as we're going to get. So we'll see what happens. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.